Yay Networks.
We know that our gut health is intricately linked with our whole body health. And while we know this objectively, sometimes it's just a hard concept to fully wrap our head around. I've been personally experiencing this firsthand for these past few months, so I'm excited to share with y'all what I've learned from my own experiences, including how 3 seemingly unrelated issues, IBS, cholesterol, and gallstones, actually all seem to be strongly influenced by the health of gut bacteria. I'll also be sharing part 2 of my interview with Dr. Tim Spector, London-based researcher and expert in all things gut microbiome. He'll be walking through my own personal results from the Zoe microbiome test. I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. A few months ago, actually about 5 months ago, we had a full episode dedicated to our gut microbiome and our wellness, and looking at the correlation, the connection between our gut microbes, our genetics, and our diet. And we were joined by Dr. Tim Spector. He is professor of genetic epidemiology in London, and he's an expert on all things gut microbes. And you may also remember that he works with a company called Zoe that tests gut health. And so it gives you a snapshot, a picture of our gut health. So I wanted to explain why it has been 5 months that we're just now getting to the follow-up on this one. So I got the results back months ago, but there was a lot of other things that I was starting to uncover at the same time. And I really wanted to be able to have a clearer picture, more answers, and a bit more of that full story before I was sharing it with y'all. I felt like there was too many unknowns that I would just be leaving a lot more question marks than what I was answering. So along the way, over these past 5 months, the Zoe test was step 1 in this gut microbiome exploration on my end, and then learning how that gut microbiome, we say, it affects all these elements of our body, this whole body wellness. And for me, what I found was that was 100% true. And those are the things that I want to walk through with y'all today. So the kind of 3 areas that I'll be sharing about, one is IBS, so irritable bowel. I've had it the majority of my life, essentially all of my adult life. I promise y'all it won't be TMI as we're talking about this. But that's one element that we'll talk about, is the IBS. The other, though, is gallbladder issues, gallstones, and some really just wildly severe gallbladder attacks that I've been having for right now. It started about 2 years ago, I would say. As I'm recording this, they started about 2 years ago. At the same time, my LDL cholesterol, my air quote bad cholesterol, was also inching up. And so it was hard to know, are these things related or are they completely independent of one another? So taking a few steps back to kind of give y'all a fuller picture of the bigger story. So I did the Zoe test, which again looks at that snapshot of gut microbiome. At the same time, I decided to do a SIBO test. SIBO stands for Small Intestine Bacterial Overgrowth, SIBO. The reason I decided to do the SIBO test, our nutrition team at Oshner Fitness Center, we were doing a certification course on integrative nutrition, functional medicine, and of course, everything comes down to gut health, And so as we're taking different continuing education courses, one of the tests that kept popping up, as a recommendation for our clients is SIBO, SIBO, again, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And I remember years ago, I had taken it probably in 2014, I had taken a test for SIBO, but the results came back inconclusive. And that was at a time that I had just a lot going on. My mom had a bunch of health issues, was in the hospital, and I just didn't have the space, the capacity to go through, do that test again. It just wasn't a priority for me, basically. So as we're going through these continuing ed courses earlier this year in the spring, I was like, you know what? I need to go through and do that SIBO test again. It's been 7 years or whatever it was. I meant to do it back then. So 7 years later, I reached out to my GI doctor and I asked him, hey, we had done this a while back. It came back inconclusive. Can we revisit this? So again, the IBS is not something that for me is all consuming. It's not something that I spend a lot of time or brain space thinking about it. But because our dietitians at Oshner Fitness Center in kind of going through this and reviewing this and realizing like, I have this a tool right here that I can do and try and take advantage of that maybe there's something that can be done about it if I do test positive for SIBO. And I thought I would have been surprised if I didn't test positive for SIBO. And again, this overarching message that our gut health is everything. I was like, why not? So the test for SIBO is really simple. It's a breath test, and it's actually what's called a lactulose challenge. So you can actually do it at your house. So my GI doctor had the test kit sent to my house. So it's like 10 skinny little test tubes, and they're empty, and they have a little screw top, and there's like a little baby straw that comes with it, and labels. So you're labeling them each with what time it is. And so you have to have kind of a limited diet the day prior. You have to be completely fasting the morning of, nothing, like no real exercise or movement, no coffee, like basically just water would be all you have. You have to be awake for at least an hour, and then you start the test. So you it's just air. You're just with a little straw into one of the tubes, and you close it, you seal it, you put the label on it with what time it is, and then immediately you drink just this little couple of 1 ounce, couple of ounces of lactulose. It's basically like a sugar solution, but it's specifically a type of a sugar called lactulose. And it's just this little concentration. You do this little shot of it, and then 15 minutes later, blow into the next test tube. 15 minutes later, blow into the next. And it's looking for two different things that can show up in your breath. One is hydrogen, one is methane. And you do this, and there's 10 tubes. The whole process takes probably about 3 hours. That's the most cumbersome thing. So I would do it if I had something that I knew I needed to be kind of like locked at the computer to do. And I would just set my timer to go off every 15 minutes. And I would have these little glass bottles and the little straw. The worst part of it was having to be up for an hour without anything, and then doing this test for 3 hours, all still fasting. So that was like the most, painful or cumbersome part of it. So you do the test, and then you just ship it into the lab. And within a couple of days, I get the results back. And it comes back that, yes, I did, in fact, test positive for SIBO. And a test, mine specifically was hydrogen positive SIBO. So that means that there was hydrogen showing up in the breath, which basically when you talk about like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, what that means is the bacteria, those probiotics, like what we talk about, like the bacteria that's in our bellies that is supposed to be in our colon, like in our large intestine, it is migrated into a space higher in our digestive tract than it's supposed to be. The problem with that is that those bacteria, they're digesting foods, they're breaking things down, they're breaking apart fibers, they're doing all their work, but they're doing that work higher up in the GI tract than they're supposed to. And that causes those symptoms of IBS because that digestion of the digestion that these little microbes are doing, the process of this is happening in a space it's not supposed to. So all the things that are associated with everybody's symptoms also with IBS are very, very different. But if you look at, whether it's constipation or diarrhea, gas, bloating, those are kind of some variation of those are most people's symptoms of IBS, one or multiple of those. That's what's happening whenever the bacteria that's supposed to be lower in your colon and your large intestine have found a way, for whatever that reason is, to get higher into that small intestine. So SIBO, again, SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, shows that is happening. So a test positive for it. Anything over a 20 shows that you have SIBO. When it comes to the hydrogen positive SIBO, and mine again was a 28. Let's take a minute to talk about Ana Luisa, one of our sponsors for this week's episode. I've been loving the look of layered necklaces, and Ana Luisa has so many versatile, timeless pieces. And what's really cool about Ana Luisa as a brand is that they design pieces with a beautiful story as well, starting with recycled materials whenever possible and small batches that are kind to the earth. Their jewelry is crafted with care from the best noble metals, yet is also affordable. Their pieces start at just $39. Check it out. You can use my code FUELED to get 10% off at shop.analuisa.com/fueled. That's shop.analuisa.com/fueled. Treat yourself, treat your loved ones to beautiful, sustainable jewelry at shop.analuisa.com/fueled. That's shop.analuisa.com/fueled using the promo code FUELED for 10% off. So the treatment, per my GI doc, the treatment is a round of antibiotics called rifaximin. And it's interesting because this is all such new-ish area that even something like that antibiotic is really a challenge to get insurance to cover it. It was a 14-day cycle of antibiotics. If insurance wasn't covering it, it was over $1,000. And we had to put in a request and follow up. And my insurance declined it at first. And so I had to work really closely with my physician, with the insurance in order to get authorization for it. So I would say if this happens, don't give up on this and continue. But it was definitely something that was not easy to get that covered. But that particular antibiotic is the one specifically recommended for this hydrogen positive SIBO. So along the way, I was like, okay, so I know I've got SIBO. It was confirmed. I kind of had a feeling I would. But once I got that confirmation that, yes, I do, I started looking into what are the other things that either cause SIBO, but also what can SIBO cause to happen in our bodies? And one of the things that I'd sort of and I know my GI doctor is probably like, come on, Molly, I've got, these intense gallbladder attacks. I'm like, why is this happening out of nowhere? And there hadn't really been any significant changes. And some are just kind of a low level pain, and some are just crazy intense. And, the smaller ones, I'm like, I can live with this. I don't want to have my gallbladder removed. I don't want to have a surgery if I don't need to. But some of those really intense ones, you're like, what do I need to do so that this doesn't continue happening? Well, one of the common denominators with gallstones and also that cholesterol, I mentioned to y'all that my LDL cholesterol had been high. One of the common denominators is bile salts. Sometimes they're called bile salts, sometimes bile acids. And bile helps to basically break down cholesterol. And that's there's a lot more other functions, but just simply put, one of the functions of bile is that it helps to break down cholesterol. So if you have a bile acid or bile salt deficiency, or for whatever reason it's just not working properly, your body's not producing it right, whatever it might be, that you're insufficient in your bile salts or bile acids, it's possible that you're not going to break that cholesterol down quite right. So in my case, my theory was, is this why these gallstones are forming? Because gallstones are cholesterol based. And is it also why that LDL cholesterol is inching its way up? And so my GI doc prescription. You can get bile salts or bile acids that are actually a prescription. And I tried those and it helped. And I didn't want to continue taking it. I was like, let me take it for a month, and it helped. And for months, I didn't have a recurrence and a gallbladder attack. And so as time went on, though, I would have a few recurrences, but then this spring, around the same time of the Zoe test, around the same time of that SIBO test, it was about 8 weeks of the most intense gallbladder attacks I'd had, throwing up, and they're usually in the middle of the night. And it was just really excruciating and really unpleasant. And I was like, something's got to give here. So all of this was sort of happening as that SIBO diagnosis came around, as that rifaximin antibiotic was getting tossed around. Is it going to be covered? Is it not going to be covered? And so finally it was covered. And so I was like, okay, so basically SIBO. So let me back up a little bit. The reason I kind of went into bile salts of that common denominator that bile salts could in theory affect gallstone formation because gallstones are cholesterol based, and bile salts could affect your LDL. Well, one of the side effects that can happen when you have SIBO is it deconjugates your bile acids. So it's basically rendering them not as effective. And so when I saw that, I was like, wait a second, if this small intestinal bacterial overgrowth that's happening, one of the side effects can be that it's essentially, let's just say it's damaging or it's interfering with bile salts or bile acids, then it could make sense that SIBO could be somehow related to this increase in LDL and also this like relatively new onset of these gallbladder attacks. So I was really interested to see what was going to happen. So I was finally, the rifaximin antibiotic got approved, and I started taking it on a Monday night. And this was after, several weeks, where about 8 weeks that the gallbladder attacks had just like really intensified, and about 10 days or 2 weeks that they had been so intense that it was like, throwing up and that really intense pain. So that had all been, literally every night. So I started taking the rifaximin on a Monday night. It was like the first week of June. And as I'm recording this podcast, we're in our 3rd week of September. And so essentially 3 months have gone by since I started taking the rifaximin, and I haven't had a single gallbladder attack. And so I was really, to me, that was like a game changer for everything. And I also just recently got my LDL cholesterol checked, and it had been, in the 130s, which is just above, like, considered just out of the normal range, but it had also bumped into the 150s. And so that's when I was like, I'm really not happy with this. And so when I had it checked, I actually had it checked just this week because I wanted to kind of be able to share, again, full picture here. It was back into the 120s. So no longer in that out of normal range. And again, it had bumped into the 150s. I really didn't like that at all. So to have it back in the 120s, I was really, really happy. So I also redid the SIBO test because I was like, okay, I did this 14-day round of antibiotics. I'm feeling an improvement on the gallbladder. I'm not having the pain or the attacks there. I didn't know yet. I mean, I hadn't checked the LDL through all that 3 months until just now. But I was like, I'm curious to see like what would a SIBO test show now if I breathe into that again. So we did another test probably 2 months in, about 1 month ago. And again, if you have a 20 or higher on the hydrogen positive SIBO, that shows that you have it. Mine was a 28. And so about 2 months after I started the antibiotic, I redid that SIBO test, and mine showed up as a 0. So I wanted to be able to bring all of that together for y'all because it really is a real life indicator. In this case, like, my personal experience of how gut microbiome can truly impact our whole body wellness. We say it, but when we can truly experience a difference in these other areas of our life that we wouldn't necessarily think are related to our gut health, to me, that's just a game changer. So I had my follow-up appointment with my GI doctor yesterday. So again, I wanted to have all of this information to kind of be able to like pull it all together, to be able to share with y'all and not bring more question marks than what I'm answering. So in my appointment with him, he's like, he acknowledges that this is a very new and continually evolving field. And his response, he's like, this is really intriguing. And the correlation of the immediate drop off in gallbladder attacks. I mean, I was like messaging him through like our portal. I mean, every day, like, this is just wildly painful. I, was resistant to having my gallbladder removed, but like I started even considering that because it's like, I can't go through this just excruciating. And then for it to immediately drop off when I start taking that. And, in the beginning, he and I both were like, okay, maybe it's just happy coincidence. Who knows? 3 months later, if it is still just happy coincidence, I will take it. I'm happy about that. Throwing in that improvement from the 150s to the 120s of the LDL, and as my GI doc said, like, this just continues to be a self-experiment. And he's like, I don't know that there's probably many other patients he has who have been like regimented or tracking these things or kind of pulling these pieces together. But for me, it's been a fascinating self-experiment to see and to kind of have trying these different things and seeing, okay, it's not just enough to say that all of a sudden LDL's high and gallbladder attacks are happening. Is there a reason why? These are two unusual things and they both kind of started at the same time. What is something that could be an underlying like common denominator here? So I would also encourage y'all, if there are things that seem abnormal, they're unusual, they're like not something that has been just part of your life. I mentioned I have had IBS my whole life. That wasn't going to be a game changer for me to say, I think this is like worth me taking all this and pursuing it. Because I'd sort of just accepted that that's kind of how, my entire life. Have I had SIBO my whole life? I mean, it's possible, but I never, again, those results that I had back 7 or so years ago came back inconclusive. I'm not sure if I did or didn't, but for me, the real motivating factor to pursue this and to try to continue to find, is there something that could be a correlation here? For me, the motivating factor is two things and two new things that are also different, the gallbladder issues and the LDL cholesterol. With that, we're going to lead into my interview and my follow-up conversation with Dr. Spector in just a bit. And he has an insanely busy schedule. And so he and I had already our interview on the books a while back. So the interview y'all are about to hear with him, where he's going through my Zoe results with me, is before we had all of these other answers. So it was when I had been diagnosed with SIBO, and it was before I got approval to take that antibiotic. And so I was sort of in this limbo phase. So as y'all will hear, it's he and I talking through my results, but also I was in a space where I was still discovering and still uncovering what all the information is going on. So their diet that's recommended for SIBO is actually a low fiber diet, essentially, because again, you've got this bacterial overgrowth in your small intestine and a space that it shouldn't be there. And so the recommended diet for SIBO is low fiber foods. So low in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, also relatively low in probiotic rich foods, at least not aggressively adding in more. So I was hesitant to really go full force and making big changes until I knew I had this SIBO thing somewhat under control, until I talked to my GI doc and, kind of talked through it all and got the green light. And so what you'll hear with my conversation with Dr. Spector is actually now that we know SIBO's a 0, I got the green light from my GI doc, because at first he's like, follow that traditional SIBO diet, the lower fiber, lower fruits, vegetables. Basically, we don't want to provide more nutrients for these bacteria that are in the space that they're not supposed to be. He's like, so the diet for that is completely opposite of everything that we talk about really all the time. So when we talk about a plant-forward diet and getting a variety of fruits, vegetables, and all these fiber-rich foods, it's really kind of the reverse of that for SIBO. So now, moving forward, I am at a place with my understanding of where things are with SIBO, my conversation with my GI doc, that the next step is to start taking this advice, this guidance that you're about to hear from Dr. Tim Spector. Let's take a minute to talk about Human, one of our sponsors for this week's episode. It can be a challenge to get all the key nutrients that we're striving for day in, day out, especially when it comes to foods and ingredients that might not be part of our everyday repertoire. So I love that Super Beets Heart Chews makes it incredibly easy. They combine non-GMO beets with antioxidant-rich grapeseed extract, helping to promote normal blood pressure as part of a healthy lifestyle. Just 2 of these little sweet treats with 20 calories and just 2 grams of sugar each have been shown to support healthy blood pressure, circulation and heart health, and help to reduce oxidative stress. Healthy blood flow means more energy without caffeine or stimulants. Join over 1 million customers, get free shipping and returns, a 90-day money-back guarantee, and right now, you can get a free 30-day supply with your first purchase at superbeets.com/fueled. That's superbeets.com/fueled. All right, so welcome, Tim. I am honored to have you back. I have learned so much from you the first time, and now having this opportunity to really comb through my own personal results from doing the Zoe test. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, well, glad if we can help.
I mentioned to you before, I've had a number of people who've reached out and said, hey, I heard the podcast that you did, and you said that you were going to do the Zoe test. I'm waiting. Have you had your results back? What was your experience? I actually had somebody email me just this morning. And so I was like, perfect timing. We're doing our interview today. So just stay tuned. There's a lot that I was surprised at. So I'm really looking forward to walking through this with you. Where do you want to start that you feel like is kind of best for our listeners for kind of giving that big picture and where to dive in?
Yeah, well, obviously what we're trying to do here is give a holistic picture of what's going on inside you. So, yeah, there are lots of specific tests you can get on the internet, particular blood tests or skin tests or hair tests or whatever, or genetic tests. What we're trying to do is to give people an overview, really, of a snapshot of where they are at this point in time and what their overall relationship is with food in the broad groups, so that we can see how they respond to carbohydrates in terms of sugars and insulins, how they respond to fats in terms of the blood lipids, and how this fits in with the gut microbiome and all the different species, the good guys, the bad guys, so that we bring that all together to provide some sort of summary that people can actually use practically on a daily basis for years to come, rather than a quick fix that's just going to last a couple of weeks, or a quick way to instantly lose weight, or whatever it is. So the idea is you're really giving people a toolkit to set themselves up for the future, so everyone can, in fact, tailor their own food choices to their own body, because one thing we've learned here is that there isn't one size fits all. There's no such thing as a unique makeup. And that's really the ethos of the Zoe program, is to sort of A, follow the science, and B, realize there isn't, always a right or wrong thing to do. And we've got to just listen to what the data is telling us, because a lot of the old science was actually wrong. And it's also particularly wrong for individuals. And many people know that, been following diets that are supposed to work on everybody, and it's failed miserably and everyone feels guilty, but, it's not like that at all. So this whole idea is very much a learning process. It's an educational process, and it's going to keep getting better. And the people who are doing this now are really the pioneers of the field. The first people to really taste what personalized nutrition is, which I think, in 5 years is going to be absolutely widespread and, be prescribed just like getting your blood pressure checked. So I think that's the big view. But we want to really empower people with knowledge, and so that they're not just taking the views of the labels on the supermarkets, what some, particular fad diet is telling to do, or, one particular important vitamin company or supplement, or whatever it is. The idea is that people can actually see their own data, think for themselves, and you then give them choices. It's not like, and there's virtually nothing we say that you should never have in the Zoe diet. Basically, there are some things that we just label as, listen, this isn't good for you, but we're all human. we all need the occasional little treat. We just have it, realize that it is a treat. It's just something you have rarely. So we're trying broadly to improve people's choices. And I think part of this is also giving people lists of foods and alternatives is a way of broadening the very narrow diets many people have. And I think, and we've discussed this a bit last time, a lot of people, particularly if they have some bowel problems or whatever, end up going down some really narrow alleyways.
Or the perception of just what they think is, I'm air quoting healthy, the things that they think are healthy or the things that they think they, quote, should be eating. And so the insights that they get from this, that we get from this of what does our blood sugar control look like? What do our blood fats look like? And maybe people who've been following a really low fat diet could actually be a little bit more generous with this. And so it gives so much insight well beyond just gut health. And I think that seeing this, it starts conversations with people and opens people's eyes to things that maybe they hadn't even really thought about before or looked at it in that way. And like you said, they're maybe chasing the latest trend or latest diet, but this really lets them see how our bodies are responding to certain foods. And the more that we see
and you get that straight away. So I'm interested in your experience because, getting the first time you get a CGM and you put it on you and you see in real time on your phone what's happening, within a few minutes of eating food. Certainly for everyone I've spoken to, that's really quite a sort of life-changing moment that you realize this real close association between what you put in your mouth and how your body responds and how sort of it's much harder to predict. It is, you can be as expert as you like, but you still get fooled. And I certainly was when I did it. You've probably done this, I don't know how many times you've done it now, so it may not have been quite as cool as the first time, but what were your experiences this time?
Well, actually, when I did the Zoe test, the glucose monitor wasn't part of it to see it all the time. So I did the one finger stick, but I'm excited to try it again where I do have that continuous glucose monitor to see in real time how I'm reacting. So explain that to our listeners, because that's a new addition that you guys did for Zoe, I believe, right?
No, well, it's always been there, but what we changed was that we changed the machine from one that the physician gets the results at the end of the study and in real time to one that feeds back the results directly in real time. So we were collecting the blood sugar results, I guess, on you, but you weren't able to see it in real time.
Well, actually, I didn't have the continuous glucose monitor.
Okay, well, I don't know why that was, but everybody's supposed to have that, unless they've got some particular reason not to have it. So I'm not quite sure what happened, but that's part of the package. Is these three things? It's a continuous glucose monitor that you get without a prescription. It's the blood fat finger prick stuff that you get with set meals, and then it's the microbiome. So there's three things together that allow us to give you your scores. So I would assume we must have got something to give you your sugar scores.
Yeah, I had the finger stick was the part that I did, but I'm looking forward to doing the continued glucose monitor. I think that will be, I feel like you said, I know a lot of the foods that I respond poorly to. And so I don't, and usually it's high sugar foods or things that are highly processed, I tend to avoid them because I feel like it is that rapid rise and then that drop. But it'd be really interesting to see it in black and white. Also, I think for the average consumer who may not be really tuned in with how do they feel and how are foods leaving them feeling, they may just always feel a little cruddy as their low level normal and not even realizing that depleted feeling they have is often in a response to a food. So I think having someone use the continuous glucose monitor it's incredibly empowering to see the direct result of what we eat and how we feel.
Yeah, and we discover new things because, we've now got millions of data points from everyone who's done the Zoe test. We recently reported on these sugar dips, about how 3 hours after a meal, about 1 in 4 people report feeling a bit low in energy and hungry at their next meal. And it turns out that, you can actually pick this up if you're looking for it in the right place, you know exactly what you're looking for. And there are certain foods in certain people that will trigger this. So, it's not just about the peaks, it's also about the shape of the curve that can have a really big impact on your hunger levels. And those people end up eating, 200-300 calories more in a day just because they chose the food that gave them a dip. So if you know that, you can then avoid those dips. And these little tricks are going to be invaluable long term as we move forward, because this, as I said, this isn't just a 6-week diet. This is although there is a 4-week plan in here to follow, and most people do lose weight and feel better on that. The idea this is sustainable. It's not like a really strict keto diet, or it's a really low fat diet. This is something that you should be able to become. Most people can keep this up for years and just have top up tests and things to check them on the right track or see if their microbes have changed. And our advice is continually being upgraded as we get more information. So the advice you've got on your gut microbes, will be probably even more detailed in a year's time as we've got more unique, diet microbe results.
And let's talk through the results. So on the blood sugar control, I did want to ask you about that. And I think there was a note on mine that said that that we didn't receive or couldn't read the blood sugar sensor from the optional study. So I think there must have been a gap in there where I didn't realize I didn't have a component of it that I was supposed to have received to do the continual glucose monitor. But still, we have the finger stick that we do, and then there's also the muffins that are the specific, control muffins that have varying fat contents or sugar contents. And so based on the finger stick information that I had, I did get a blood sugar control that was a 44, and it actually fell into the poor category. So I realized that that's probably not as detailed because I didn't have the continuous glucose monitor. The way I perceive that is the poor is probably, well, I guess you tell me, but again, if I eat a food that is highly processed, just a lot of white carbs or a lot of sugar and not a lot of fiber or protein or fat, I feel immediately, or not, maybe not immediately, but within 30 minutes to an hour, I'm ravenous. I'm hungrier than I was before I ate that food. My energy is bottomed out, and I don't have the clarity of thinking. So I specifically, it's very easy for me then to choose to avoid, if someone has birthday cake at the 10 a.m. staff meeting, it's really easy for me to avoid that. Not because, I shouldn't eat that cake, but wow, I know how I'll feel if I have that sugar right now. And so it makes it easy for me to avoid. But is that experience that I have when I eat those sugar or refined foods, is that what is also, I guess, linked with this, what's referred to as like poor blood sugar control on my report?
Yes, but it's more complicated than just a yes/no. I think what it's suggesting is when we say there's a poor sugar response, it really means that compared to other people of your age, we would predict that your sugar peak is slightly above average. It's not much above average, just slightly above average, so that it's stimulating a lot of insulin and pushing your blood sugar up, and it takes a little bit to get it down again. It's not completely effortless, all right? So you are sort of pushing your insulin a bit just to get everything under control. But, a score of in the 40s is not terrible. And the higher the score, generally there is a rough correlation with dipping as well, which is what you were describing there, that, you don't feel well after some foods, and then you feel hungrier. So there's a correlation there, but we're working currently on a score that will allow us to separate out those two things and give you, in a way, a dipper score as well as a peak score. But we don't have that yet because we only discovered this quite recently, so we're trying to separate out into more detail.
And I think it's important for people to not judge themselves. It's not like everyone wants to get a really high score on everything they do. It's like the competition that we have. And so when I look at it, it's like, wow, it's poor. But you said yours was poor.
Well, yours is much better than mine. So, you should be happy. I'm about 20 or something.
Wow,
because,
okay.
And it's not my fault.
Right.
Some of this, I can blame, my parents and my grandmother who had diabetes. It is what it is. And, my fat score was also much worse than yours. So the only thing I beat you on was microbes. So, otherwise I'd probably be dead by now. So, so that's good. So, it's very rare to have everyone who's super good in everything. There are a few people, but it's quite unusual. And of course, our job is not to judge or to just reassure everybody they're super healthy. It's to try and, tease apart these things, make people think, and, give them our honest ideas of what everyone is. Because I don't think anybody's 100%, okay? That's a mistake to think that modern humans can ever be 100% because, we're all living on this polluted planet, eating polluted foods, and we've all been taking antibiotics, and it's not our fault. This is just where we are. So perfection is quite a long way away. So people like yourselves who might get a bad, don't be too hard on yourselves, all right? Because a lot of people in that position, and it's usually not your fault at all. But it's a sign that we can all do better. And I think in a way, it'd be very dull if everyone had maximum scores and said, okay, well, that's it. I can, do what I like now. I don't have to worry about whatever I eat for the rest of my life, which would be the wrong message.
We'd all be those incredible specimens that we read about that lived to be whatever age and they ate and drank whatever they wanted. On the blood sugar, like if the blood sugar control, like you said, yours is poor, yours is in the 20s, mine's in the 40s. If someone does have that score of something poor or not ideal there, does that indicate that the recommendation for people like you and me who are scoring poorly on that blood sugar control in our bodies are having to be challenged even a little bit more and work a little bit harder to process those carbs and sugars? Would that indicate that the recommended approach for us for the majority of our diet would be to minimize those things because it is taxing to our bodies when we consume sugars or those white carbs?
Exactly. So we will then look and see which of those carbs was causing those peaks more than others, and we would generally score those down. And so we recommend you have those less often than carbohydrates that were easier on your blood glucose levels. So that's how it works. Whereas some people who had really good scores, can eat as much bread and rice and pasta and hardly got a flicker, we'd say, hey guys, you seem to be doing fine. You go ahead and, this diet seems to suit you fine because you can eat all this stuff and your body's clearly not being stressed out by it. And so even, long term, you should be fine. I mean, clearly there might be a difference between a 20-year-old and a 70-year-old, but in general, that's the principle. And the same thing is generally true for the fats.
And so the continuous glucose monitor would also tell someone, because they would be able to see in real time, okay, I ate that whole grain waffle and it really, it spiked it and I had a stronger reaction, but I ate maybe that almond flour tortilla and I had a milder response. So that helps them to actually see their response to real foods and start to kind of understand how their body is processing these.
Exactly. And the Zoe test allows you to actually test some foods yourself. You've got a few days of your own experiments, and so you can work out, the sort of things you love or your regular breakfast or whatever it is. You can just compare them and see how you got on. And for me, for example, I could compare eating different breakfasts of it, yogurt, oat porridge, or muesli, granola, and got very different results. Or just comparing a banana and an apple.
Right.
And actually, there's quite a big difference. So for me, I used to, always take a banana to work with me, and now, I'm much more a pear or an apple guy. Just because I say, well, if I do that every day, that's quite a big difference. And so, I changed what my sort of habitual stuff was. But again, it's another reminder that we do get stuck in these habits, and we sort of, just because it's easier to have a habit sometimes than to think, just to keep challenging ourselves to say, well, maybe there is something a little bit better, or what about variety? Because we know that variety is really crucial for your gut microbes, and I think we have so much choice now that we tend to get defensive and go down to our few favorites. And I think we're all guilty of that, including myself.
Let's pause for a minute to talk about Headspace, one of our sponsors for this week's episode. So you may have tried meditation before and it just didn't go so well, or maybe you felt like you were just doing it wrong. If enhancing your mental well-being as part of your self-care plan this year, then you're going to want to check out Headspace. Headspace is your daily dose of mindfulness in the form of guided meditations in an easy-to-use app. It's one of the only meditation apps advancing the field of mindfulness and meditation through clinically validated research. I love that Headspace is just so customizable for whatever we're dealing with right now. Whatever the situation, Headspace really can help us feel better. We all deserve to feel as happy as possible, and Headspace truly is meditation made simple. Go to headspace.com/fueled. That's headspace.com/fueled for a free 1-month trial with access to Headspace's full library of meditations for every situation. This is their best deal offered right now, so head to headspace.com/fueled today. And so shifting over to the next, as I turn the page in my report, to the blood fat control. So the blood fat marker, so we looked at blood sugar, and I think blood sugars people are really familiar with because it's really easy for someone to almost identify like someone with diabetes. You eat carbohydrates, you have this rise of blood sugar. Blood fat control is a little bit maybe less familiar to someone to visualize, but essentially it's indicating how well we clear fats from our blood and how well our body can essentially handle and digest foods that are higher in fats. And so this is something that I guess that's sort of my my version of explaining it, but how would you explain it to someone of like why their blood fat results matter?
Okay, so unlike blood sugar, it takes longer for your fats to appear in the blood. Okay, so they're absorbed usually lower down in the gut. They involve the gut microbes. They involve your liver and your bile system, and usually that's why we look at 6 hours after a fatty meal as a fairly crucial time that separates out people that have really got rid of their fats in their system, in their blood by now, and those that haven't. And we've got a real big range of results, about 8-fold difference between people eating the same fatty muffin in terms of how much of the main fat that's carried around in blood, which is called the triglycerides, which is just 3 sort of fat particles stuck together. And what this really tells us is that the people like me, but who find it hard to get rid of fats, end up with these small particles hanging around in our bloodstream for much longer than they should normally be, or in someone healthy. Everyone else has got rid of them straight away. They're not hanging around. And when you get, because fat is made up of lots of different components. There isn't just one. Everyone thinks of it as just cholesterol. It isn't. It's like hundreds of little micro fractions that you break whether it's your yogurt, your cheese, your meat, whatever it is, down to. And it's these really tiny ones. If they hang around, they get stuck in your blood vessels, and they cause inflammation. And that is very stressing all your vessels in your body, and that's what we think causes this long-term inflammation, this long-term stress. And that's what we're trying to avoid. So this is picking up people that find it hard to have lots of fats and get rid of them quickly, and that builds up the inflammation, which causes a problem. So you've got the short-term sugar spikes, which do the same thing, and you've got these longer-term fat spikes, which also do the same thing. And that's what we're scoring people on, because generally we just want to get those inflammation levels down. And if we do that, then your body is functioning much more efficiently. So that's the story of it, and that's why we're grading people on that score.
And the blood fats are, like you said, it's not just about cholesterol levels or triglyceride levels, but it's also so intricately related to inflammation in our bodies. So the more we can do to manage that and to buffer that response, the better as far as inflammation. And what was your score for blood fats?
I think I was about 18 or something.
Really?
Terrible.
That's terrible. Are your triglycerides or how are your lipids when you have them tested normally?
They're actually not too bad. So so I wouldn't know from my fasting levels. They're actually much better than from my age. So it just shows you that I can't overdo the fats either. So I'm bad on both scores. So
right.
I've got to be, I guess all I can eat is plants. But which is a real problem because I do love cheese, and that's probably my downfall.
So that makes me feel really good because I was really disappointed. We haven't gotten to my gut score, which we will, which I was disappointed in that. And I was a little, but the blood fats.
But your fat score, just remind me, it was, you got what, 70 or 80 were you?
84. 84.
Okay, well that's nearly a maximum score. So that really means that you can have a really high fat diet and, there's not much restriction. If they're good, as long as they're reasonable fats, we're not talking about eating trans fats and
right.
cookies, but, it means you can handle it really well. You get rid of that fat and it just doesn't seem to build up. Whereas for me, if I kept eating, cheese in very large quantities, I would get this point that would cause me problems. So, I'm very jealous of your score on that one.
It's interesting because I have naturally over the years realized what things I feel that I respond better to and what I don't. And so with sugar, it's something that I just don't even I'm not tempted by it because I know that response that I feel. And so it's something that I really have limited in my diet. Again, not because as a dietitian, we want to cut sugar back, but really more about, gosh, I don't want to feel that way. On the flip side, I do have, and over the years, I've really increased the amount of fats in my diet and I feel so much better. I feel, and it's things like avocado, nuts, seeds, nut butters, olive oils, things that maybe back in, the 80s or 90s when we all thought everything had to be low fat, I would have never dreamt that I would add in the volume of fats that I have in my diet now. But I feel very, my energy, my blood sugar levels, my focus, GI issues, all of these things I feel work really well with having that level of fat. So it's interesting that sort of what I've gravitated toward, this almost validates that a little bit.
Did you ever go on a short-term, really high-fat keto diet or not?
I've never done keto so specifically where I went really low protein or lower protein as well. And I always like vegetables and things like that so much. But yeah.
It sounds like you would probably tolerate it okay if you did for a short while. I'm not advocating it because I don't think it's a good long term, but someone like you would tolerate it, whereas I don't think I would. So it's just these are the sort of things that you learn from this, and I think people who have a very different fat and a carb response, I think, do get quite a lot out of this. This test. It really really some people have a guess that that's what's going on, but this is really helpful, and I think allows them a much greater confidence to go on and, you know, continue with it rather than never being quite sure what they're doing. I think that's really important.
I 100% agree. And I think about the hundreds or thousands of clients I've worked with over the past 20 years. And when you're guiding someone to make healthy choices because, you know, nutritionally, these are the better things to do, and they understand it, it's still very abstract. And it's still something that they're just hearing, and they're trusting me or trusting a dietitian or somebody that they're talking with. And okay, these are the things that I'm going to do because you're telling me, or I've read, or I've seen the research that they're better for me. But when we see it in these the black and white, that it's this hard data that is directly like ours, and we can see that, okay, this explains why I have that reaction, or this explains why it's best for me to limit those types of things. I think that goes really, really far to maintaining someone's adherence and maintaining that motivation.
Yeah, no, that's what we're finding. That's some of the feedback we're getting from you know, the customers, that they really do value that. And you know, it's the first time they can trust it because they've seen it themselves. You know, rather than just someone saying, "I think you'll do great on this." You know.
And then Zoe helps to tie it all together, because Zoe has the a meal builder feature in the app that also, like, you can, based on your scores and based on your continual glucose monitor and getting real-time feedback and putting together meal combinations and types of foods that can kind of help guide a person. So if you don't have somebody that you are working with, like a registered dietitian who's helping you, or even if you do, this sort of takes it to the next level of precision based on your specific body. And so it's this whole helping, I guess, a program like Zoe is helping us do the investigative work, but then also helping to provide that solution for people too.
Yeah, as a professional, what did you think of those sort of meal plans? Were they things that you would agree with and suggest as well?
Yeah, I would say most of them were. I mean, I think that they're centered on real whole foods, and the types of foods may vary, but it's still, I think it's far better than what the average person's consuming anyway. And so no matter what, you know, and what combinations they're doing, it's still going to be a lot better than what most people are choosing.
Yeah, and I think it's just nice to get other choices, as I said, you know, sort of at the beginning, to get out of your comfort zone and try some new things, and you know, get yourself cooking in a different way and this kind of stuff. So, interesting, and so I guess you didn't try them, but did you change your diet after?
Not yet, but after we talk about gut health score, I'd like to talk with you about some of the things that we think would be good for that. As I said, kind of in the intro and kind of shared with our listeners, I have been kind of on this interesting and learning journey about even more about gut health than what I've had. You know, I'm 46 now, and so from about the age of 15, 16, I've had IBS. And, you know, of course, IBS is sort of a catch-all. You just know that something's not right, but there's not a clearly defined of what exactly it is. And so having the diagnosis of SIBO and working with that, it's actually a little bit opposite of what we'll be talking about with gut health, because it is, for a short period of time, limiting things that might be higher in fiber and prebiotics, et cetera. So I've kind of been in a weird transition space as I've been addressing the SIBO, but I'm really looking forward to, as that is in check and in better control and hopefully resolved to some degree, to then really start looking at the things to improve gut health.
And just remind everyone what your gut score was.
Let's get to those pages. Okay, we'll put the sugar and the fat aside.
Remember, you're beating me out of 2 out of 3, so I can beat you on one of them, can't I?
So the gut the gut health, we'll say the first two are done by blood tests and looking at like your blood fats and blood sugars. The gut microbiome is actually a poop test, and so you do a poop test, you send it in, you get your results, and I'm gonna keep the suspense going for a minute. But I knew as I did it, I would have been stunned if I had a really good report on the Zoe gut health. It would have been surprising to me if I did, because it is something that IBS is something that's just been a struggle for decades. So I would have thought I would be maybe not great, but I would be okay. And so when I looked, the first thing that I looked at, because there's so much data that you get with your Zoe results, and I scrolled through it all and went through it all, and the first thing I was like, let me see what this gut health score is. It's 22. It is like there's 4 categories: low, medium, high, and very high. And mine was in the rock bottom low at a 22.
Yeah. And just to summarize, I mean, that means that 2 things going on. You're lacking diversity of microbes. Okay. So you don't have the full range of species that would allow you to produce all the helpful chemicals that we want, because we know the richer it is, generally healthier it is. And also the ratio of the good to bad bugs for you was going in the wrong direction. So you had more of the bad guys than the good guys. And that's how those overall ranks are done. And and so you weren't happy with that.
No.
You were happy. It was lower than you thought it would be.
It was really low. I thought I would be somewhere in the middle. Like I was like, yeah, if I get a 50 or a 60 or something, I would have been really surprised. Sort of like with the SIBO, I would have been surprised if I didn't have it. I wasn't surprised that I did, but I wasn't surprised that it was, I was surprised that it was this poor. And then what's fascinating is the Zoe report breaks it into different types of the gut bacteria, like you were saying. And Zoe sort of just categorizes it as good bugs and bad bugs. And there's 15 of each that are listed. And what's really, I just found it just like, I was really intrigued by this, that as it goes through each of those 15 quote good bugs, and the good bugs are considered good because they're associated with like healthy metabolism, lower inflammation, better blood sugar control, blood pressure, all of these things. It lists what the normal population has, and so it lists the abundance of each of these bacteria or types of bacteria in the normal population. And for many of them, I had none, not even low, but none. And I'm looking at, it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 of the 15, I had none detectable.
Oh dear.
I know. It was upsetting.
Well, they might be. You might have had a few. They're just hiding. So you need to work out how to tease them out. Well, I mean, there's two real reasons I can think of that it's that low. And the first is really in general for people with IBS to realize that nearly every study that's been done has shown that on average, regardless of the type of IBS, people have lower than average diversity and will have this ratio that is worse than average. So, your starting point would have probably been, 40 or something like that. You would never get a score of 80 or 90 if you had IBS. That's really because of the inherent inflammation that is there. And again, we don't know why this is, but we've talked about the other reasons for it. And it might be that your threshold for eating food that causes inflammation is really low. So, you have to be even more careful what you eat because it can be triggered more easily. We don't know the answer. This is just speculation. But we do know that once you've got inflammation in the system, it subtly changes things like the pH in the gut, and it makes it much harder for some of these good bugs to hang around and much easier for the pro-inflammatory ones who actually like They like a bit of chaos, they like a bit of these stress hormones, and they move in, and they're not the ones that are particularly good for you. So that's really what's happening in many people like you, whether they have even very mild IBS or severe, or even the other spectrum, the inflammatory bowel diseases, the colitis, which are of the other end. There seems to be a general similarity. It's just on a slightly different scale, but that's what all the microbiome tests are showing. That there's a sort of spectrum of this inflammation. Anyone really has some sort of long-standing gut problems. But the good news is that there was our study in Nature Medicine. There was another study just in the journal Gut just last week of over 1,000 people who had gut problems, and they found that the relationship between the microbes and the foods that were associated with them was pretty much the same. That it didn't sort of matter which gut problem you had, which suggested there was this general idea of inflammation running through it. So I think that's the first reason that you have low levels. And then probably you hinted at the other reason there as well, is that in order to try and limit some of your symptoms, you've probably been trying to cut out certain foods that you think might trigger it. And that's where the FODMAP diet comes in, and that general concept that there are these particular groups of plants and other foods that can trigger this increased inflammation as well. And so many people with IBS or SIBO end up on being rather fearful of certain foods and restrict their diet, and so they have perhaps a more restricted range of foods than if they didn't have IBS. So I think it's probably a combination of those two things together is in most cases what would be driving this. But there are lots of things that can affect the microbiome as well. I'm not saying it's the only one. Things like lots of antibiotic use, other health conditions, where you live, urban v rural, all kinds of stuff like that. But I think they're the two main drivers here.
I agree.
And that's really what someone like yourself, getting those results, she just needs to rethink a bit. The wider concept of what in a week you'd be eating, thinking about, well, how can I best feed my poor microbes? They need my help here. I've got to get these good guys up to fight the bad guys. So how do I do that?
And I think for our listeners as well, as we're talking about my results and this very low score, as Tim said, some of it is the direct correlation that people with IBS essentially almost always, if not always, have a lower than expected gut health score, regardless of diet. And you were saying for many of the times, someone with IBS, you would look at them as maybe a baseline in the 40s, not to even expect 80s or 90s, because it's just not going to happen for most. You also were telling me that when you and I did a quick huddle call a couple of weeks ago, that you had done studies on, or there are studies on twins with IBS, and that the twin who had IBS always scored worse than the twin without. So there's just a lot there. So for my results, we're looking at, I think, exactly what you said, both the IBS, a direct correlation. Also, the things that I find are that I find that maybe I don't digest as well, or that sort of trigger a reaction for me with IBS, I might avoid those foods. And those, I completely agree, I think are the two main culprits for me. When we're looking at someone in just the general population, if you're doing a test, the Zoe test, and you're looking at your results, that's just for me because I have IBS. I think when, as Tim was saying, the other things that can affect gut health, like antibiotics, yes. And Tim, when we did our podcast a couple of months ago, we talked about sugars, and a lot of the high sugar, highly refined diet negatively interferes with gut health, and alcohol. Alcohol is a huge negative influence on our gut health. So I think for our listeners thinking, okay, if you have that poor gut score, it might not be the same reasons as mine. So evaluating your sugar intake, your alcohol intake, and those things. And so for me, those things aren't as much of an issue, but exactly what Tim said, is. And in our our first podcast interview, I really love the guideline that you give of aiming for 30 different plants a week. When you say it, it sounds a lot better. 30 different plants, which sounds much, much more sophisticated. And so I counted because I was like, well, how many am I having with this horrible gut score? What do I have? And I'm right at about 24 on average a week. However, I think it's just what you said about diversity, because when I looked at and I counted up, because for our listeners, as that reminder, it isn't just plants that you think of like your green leafy vegetables and things like that. Plants can also be your nuts or seeds or things that are that you're not necessarily thinking just your green leafies. And however, that 24, probably I accomplished them over the course of 3 days, maybe 4. But I'm eating those same 24. So I'm not, and you say aim for 30 different species of plants a week and then rotating those as much as possible week to week, not just even getting in that same rut.
Yeah. As much as you can. But, over 20 is still pretty good. So, you don't beat yourself up too much. But it's just a sign that, everyone can improve. And even when I get my 30, I can still do better. And, it's just always challenging yourself to try something new or a different fruit or changing up your nuts or seeds, whatever it is. Don't just always get the same brand of everything. And just realize that, diversity is the absolute key. And of course, the other thing that would help, of course, is, are probiotic foods, fermented foods. So how do you do on those?
I used to have a lot of yogurt or kombucha. And for some reason, just in the past few months, I've dialed that back. And so that's something that I just finished the round of antibiotics for the SIBO. So I'll be doing one more test of that to assess the status. And hopefully after that, and I'll report back. I'm going to maybe even save this podcast interview that you and I are doing so I can include the results of that in about a week so that our listeners are still in suspense on that. And then I'll look at, okay, let me just really amp this up with adding that yogurt back in, kombucha. I'm not as much a kimchi person, but I do like other fermented foods that I'll have often.
Yeah, any fermented vegetable, sauerkraut or anything else, or doing your own fermented ones. But I think, and how about kefir? Do you go for that?
I love kefir, but it's not something that I keep on hand, but I'm going to start. Yeah, I really love it.
It's super easy to make yourself as well. If you can't get it in your local store, and it's just, and it, to be honest, you just need a tiny amount of it. So people think they have to drink, pints of the stuff, but really, it's like a little shot you have in the morning. That's what I do. So they're very easy things to do, and because it's fermented, it does keep for a long time.
Right.
It's the magic of fermented foods. It's just slightly different every day because the microbes are still working. But so I think that's another area then that
probiotics.
Probiotics you can work on. And of course, there are now for people who not into dairy or vegans, you can get some very good coconut kefirs as well that are very high in the amount of microbes they've got.
Yeah, so great point.
Lots of ways to do this. Yeah.
A lot of the yogurts, the plant-based yogurts, have been incredibly high in sugar historically, but there's several brands, Forager and Kite Hill, and also Siggy's. Each have plant-based yogurts here in the U.S. that are good sources of protein and either zero added sugar or low added sugar, which would be another if you're not doing dairy. I think that's a really great point. And for our listeners, kefir is what we're talking about. It's basically, it's a fermented drink. It's almost a little bit like a plain yogurt, an unflavored yogurt that would be in a drinkable form. It's the closest thing that I can describe it as. And it's KEF as in Frank IR. And you'll see that. And again, looking for unsweetened of all of these so that we don't get the added sugar.
If you get over a dozen different microbial bugs in it, as opposed to just 2 or 3 in yogurt. So that's why it's like, I call it super yogurt.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
give it a try, and it's a bit more sour for people who haven't tried it. So you may want to mix it with yogurt when you start off until you start getting the taste for it, and then after a while you start to love it. And you can get it in cow's milk, goat's milk, sheep's milk, depending where you live, how far you are. They're close to animals, I think.
So in my case, I will up my variety. I will aim for that 30, which is, I'm pretty close to it, but I'll aim for more diversity within that 30 than what I currently have. The kefir, I love the kombucha, the yogurt. I love the Faye, just unflavored plain Greek yogurt. So those are things that I will start adding. What do you think if I'm adding these? What do you think about a timeline of redoing the Zoe kit, doing the poop test again, but then also taking that opportunity to do the glucose monitor? How long would you recommend waiting?
I'd wait at least 3 months.
Okay.
That was what I'd probably do. That usually gives enough time to do it. So we're normally recommending retesting at 6 months, but I think for you, at least 3 months should be enough. And also, the point is that if you can reduce those sugar and fat peaks by following the advice on the app about the scores for each of the foods, that should reduce your inflammation levels, which should help your gut in the first place. So I think it's coming back to this holistic idea that we mustn't get too obsessed with one particular part of the body. It's the whole thing we're trying to sort out. We're trying to reduce all the stresses. So you help the microbes on one end, but you can also help the environment by reducing, these peaks in the blood. And I think that it all goes together. So, and that's why people who've done the 4-week test and tried to stick to these scores, they're doing it, again, without calorie counting. So people realize we're not talking about calorie counting, we're not talking about, excluding high-calorie foods in any way. It's just changing what you eat, making you think about it more. The average person, yes, they are losing 7 pounds in weight on average or whatever it is. But interesting that they find that their energy levels, the main thing they're reporting is they feel an energy boost, which is not something we expected from this at all. And that might be a very pleasant side effect for people that just switching to foods that suit their body more. And I think that's what it's all about. It's just experimenting, but suddenly you've got the tools to help you.
And when we talk about gut health, it's so much more than just the IBS. The IBS is one element of it that sort of explains that poor score. But when we look at gut health, as you and I talked about in our last podcast interview, that microbiome is ruling so much of what is happening in our body. So when we look at how our body is processing fats or what our cholesterol levels are, gallbladder issues, all of this can be related to that gut health. And so sometimes there might be a manifestation of a symptom in one way that we don't even realize, or depression, or mood issues. I'm really grateful that I feel like in spite of this horrific gut score I have, I actually feel stable energy, stable mood. I feel very level, but I'm highly aware that a lot of people with such a poor gut score may also have a lot of manifestations that they're feeling in terms of mood or anxiety or these other things, because that gut microbiome is just such a powerful driver of all these things. So as we're talking about this, to me, it's not something to take lightly and say, oh, well, it's just low because I have IBS. It's something to say, this is really serious, and what are the things that I can really be in control of? And while it might not be ever a high score, it can at least be hopefully a heck of a lot better than what it is. And looking at, even as nutrient rich and purposeful and mindful as my diet is, just as Tim and I are talking, there's still room for improvement. And so no matter what we're doing or how healthy we think we are, what can we learn from this and take away and still up our game a bit?
Yeah, and it's reminding yourself, you're not fighting other people. You talk about improving your own score. So that's the only thing that's important, is saying, this gives you a snapshot. You say, listen, okay, I've got now a benchmark. What can I do to change this? And this is something that will help me work out how I'm doing. So I think that's absolutely really, really important that people don't get depressed and they say this is an opportunity that I've got something to work with. And as you said, I think it's even more important for people with IBS to improve their gut health and not give up on it, because those little numbers of beneficial microbes, they really need your help. They're swamped by all these nasty pro-inflammatory ones. So you've got to feed them up, get them fighting on your corner. And it's interesting. I've got a parasite in me that I don't know whether you had it or not, but there's this guy called blastocystis.
I didn't.
Which used to be associated with traveller's diarrhea, but we found it in certainly it's in about 30% of British people and 15% of Americans. And it turns out it's actually good for you, and it helps. It's fat busting parasite. It eats fat and reduces the amount of fat inside your body, and so we find these rare discoveries. So we've got to work out how to feed up these guys.
Did you tell us what your gut score was? I don't think that you did.
Mine was about 80, I think.
Really? That's really impressive. Now this is the conversation.
I was disappointed. I wanted to be top, you see. So I thought, well, I can't. I eat pretty well, but I guess the fact that I had my very bad glucose, my blood sugar scores and my fat scores were bad probably is bringing me down. So that's my excuse.
But I think 80 is really great. But I guess you're like, I am a gut microbiome researcher. I should be at the top of this game.
Exactly. So people probably think I'm a loser if I'm not 100. So
that's how I felt as a dietitian. I'm like, how do I have such a poor score? Yeah. Okay. Well, 80 is incredible.
So don't worry about it. Yeah. No, okay. But it's a good lesson for everybody. We can all do better, including myself. So, it's a continuous experiment, and we want to get everyone involved with it, because I think it's a fantastic way to educate people about food and diet, and make everyone become a teacher really of other people.
I agree. So I have my homework that I'll do. I'm interested to see what the results will show after the diligence of following that for the 3 months. And I'll definitely do another podcast on that. If I have questions, I'll probably just reach out to you. I don't know that I'll rope you in for another podcast on it, but if there's something that's alarming or earth-shattering, maybe we'll chat again. But I think it'll be really fascinating to see the results after making these specific and purposeful changes. And again, for our listeners, we'll link to the Zoe website. And if you have questions, you can always email me. I can share what my experience is, but it's a lot of really useful insight that is starting conversations within ourselves. It's starting conversations and awareness that maybe we didn't have before. And again, giving us a little bit of reinforcement for maybe those things that we feel like we maybe should do, but don't have the motivation to follow through all the time. This can help give us that reinforcement. So any last things, Tim, before we wrap up?
No, I just hope that some of your listeners have found this interesting enough and will go on and do their own experiments and tell us how they got on. And I think everyone's got their own story, and it's helping shape the science and what we're doing. So it's great fun working together. So yeah, go for it, guys. Go to the Join Zoe website and get your kit and be your own scientist on your own body.
I love it. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Okay, my pleasure.
All right. A tremendous thank you to Dr. Tim Spector for carving out his time so generously, not once, but twice, to really dive deeply into the topic of gut microbiome, why it matters, why it's so relevant, and really sharing such actionable and understandable steps that we can take and things that we can start doing right now, things that all of us have some takeaways that we can improve, no matter how good we think we're doing. Because clearly, no matter how well, how nutritiously we think that we may be eating, there's always going to be some element, some space, some room for improvement. And what this all tells us ultimately is we are all so incredibly unique when it comes to how our own bodies respond to food. And understanding this can be life-changing. And when we understand our bodies, we can start to work with it. I'm really grateful to Dr. Spector and the Zoe team because they've also given our listeners a 10% promo code. So if you've been listening to this and you're like, oh man, this sounds really cool, I'd like to try it, you get 10% off. You can use the code FUELED10 at checkout. So go to joinzoe.com. It's JOINZOE.com. Joinzoe.com and use the promo code FUELED10 at checkout to save 10%. And as always, I want to know what you think, what you've learned, how this has helped you. If there's things that you've tried or you've learned that you've changed or incorporated, whether it was before this or from listening to this interview with Dr. Spector or other things we've talked about with gut microbiome, I always want to hear about it. Feel free at any time to reach out to me. I am registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. If you would like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And join us next week for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.